My entitled sisters demanded I hand over my vacation home, so their husbands broke in and got arrested. Let me tell you something about family barbecues. They always sound like a good idea until you're standing there, frozen margarita in hand, watching your drunk sisters argue about whose kid nearly drowned, and somehow it's all your fault. That's basically how this whole disaster started, and by the time it ended, we're talking broken gates, shattered door locks, 2 brothers-in-law in handcuffs, a criminal case, and a signed legal settlement. All because I wouldn't let entitled people use something that was never theirs to begin with. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with a break-in, it starts with a barbecue. My parents decided to host a 4th of July party. Well, technically a fake 4th of July, since one sister's family had been on vacation during the actual holiday. So we're talking flags, red, white and blue decorations, a margarita machine, sparklers for the kids. The whole suburban fantasy. Now, I'll be upfront. I don't particularly enjoy spending time with my 2 sisters or their husbands. It's not some dramatic falling out. It's more of an oil and water situation. They're 8 and 10 years older than me. We don't have much in common. My wife and I are child-free professionals who save aggressively, invest consistently, and take nice trips once or twice a year. My sisters are both stay-at-home moms whose husbands make decent money, but somehow never have any. The lifestyle difference grates on them, constantly. My wife, being the optimistic and forgiving person she is, convinced me we should go. So we went. By the time we arrived, about 20 people were already there. My sisters and their husbands were solidly buzzed. I say buzzed, but let's be honest, we're talking full on. Afternoon, drunk. My mom was frantically running after 5 kids aged 7 to 11, trying to prevent property damage and personal injury. My dad had wisely retreated to the whirlpool section of the pool with a small cooler of beers. Smart man. My wife and I made small talk, ate some food, and accepted frozen margaritas. Standard issue. My sisters took turns criticizing us for being late, not being in swimsuits, and quote, screwing up the vibe, whatever that means. About 45 minutes in, 2 of the kids ran full speed at a neighbor standing near the pool steps and pushed her in. She stumbled, got soaked from the waist down, and was very clearly unhappy about it. But she handled it gracefully, grabbed her towel, dried off, and left without making a scene. My sisters and their husbands thought it was hilarious. A little while later, I'm standing a few feet from the pool, talking to someone when I catch movement from the corner of my eye. 3 kids, running at full speed, directly at me. Their little faces absolutely telegraphing the plan. I stepped sideways at the last second. All 3 of them ran straight into the pool. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't entertained. Most of the other guests were laughing too, but their parents, already well past the point of making good decisions, absolutely lost it, screaming at everyone in general, and me in particular, for nearly letting their kids drown. 2 of the kids were holding their parents' iPhones and filming the whole thing. Those phones were now at the bottom of the pool. One of my brothers-in-law actually got into the pool to try to retrieve the phones. His current blood alcohol level made this ineffective. Nobody volunteered to help, unsurprisingly, given that my sisters were still screaming at everyone within earshot. I told them plainly, it was their job to watch their kids. If anything had happened, it would have been their responsibility, not mine. The words exchanged after that were not polite. My wife and I left shortly after the other brother-in-law fell over and face-planted while yelling at me. Dad never got out of the whirlpool. That evening, my sister started a group text. What followed was genuinely nasty, from both sisters and their husbands. My wife and I blocked all 4 of them. My mom called me, clearly upset about the messages. She and my dad had both been in the group chat. My parents insisted on a meeting the next day, sisters and husbands, no kids. The result was a reluctant, unenthusiastic apology delivered through my mom's phone. I accepted it, said thanks, told them I didn't need to discuss it further, and that evening I unblocked them. That lasted about 12 hours. That night, one of my brothers-in-law texted me asking when I'd be paying for the 2 iPhones, apparently over $400 each, that had gone to the bottom of the pool when his own kids ran into it, trying to push me in? I replied, never. Took a screenshot, forwarded it to my parents, and told them we were done. We blocked all 4 again. My dad called them, and from what I understand, was not gentle about it. He also told them something that changed the whole dynamic of this situation. The grandkids would no longer be welcome at his place indefinitely. Since my mom provides free weekly babysitting for both families, this landed hard. He also told them they were banned from the vacation home. And then he told them something they apparently did not know. That vacation home? My parents don't own it. I do. Here's the backstory on that, because it matters. A few years back, I was in a good financial position. I'd been saving and investing aggressively since my mid-20s. I sold my loft, moved in with my now wife, and around the same time received a significant bonus. My parents had always wanted a place in the mountains, but could never have afforded it themselves, so I bought it for them. 3 lots at the end of a private road, killer views, sleeps a good number of people. My parents controlled the day-to-day. They decided who used it and when. My sisters and their families used it regularly. I never cared about that. The place was for my parents to enjoy. If they wanted to share it with family, that was their call. The reason we kept my ownership quiet was simple. We knew my sisters would immediately assume I'd used my wife's money, and we didn't want that drama. Well, now they knew. A few days after that revelation, my sisters and their husbands showed up at our place unannounced to apologize in person. We were out to dinner. They left a note. One sister also called me at work, which I sent straight to voicemail. We decided going fully, no contact was the right call, and that's where we stayed, for over 3 weeks without incident. And then things got genuinely complicated. My parents called to give me a heads up that my older sister had come to them in financial crisis. She and her husband had been living well beyond their means. Maxed out credit cards, car leases, so far behind that, a repossession was imminent, and his income had apparently been significantly less than what he'd been telling people for years. But that wasn't the worst of it. For the past 3 years, my older sister had been renting out the vacation home behind everyone's backs. We're talking $2,000 or more for a weekend, $4,000 or more for a full week. She'd been running an unauthorized short-term rental business using a property she didn't own, pocketing the money, and never mentioning it to anyone, not to me, not to my parents. When our access was cut off, she had to cancel bookings she'd already taken. I had actually suspected something like this once before. I'd driven up to drop off some equipment and found strangers there who said they were guests of my sister. I'd let it go at the time, assumed she was lending the house to friends. I should have asked more questions. My parents were stressed. My mom more than my dad. Dad was mostly just furious, and they were right to warn me, because within days, both sisters showed up at my house again, unannounced, without husbands this time, and waited outside until I got home. I had a choice. Deal with it in the hallway or invite them in. I let them in. What followed was about an hour of denial, crying, yelling and cursing. They wanted me to give them back access to the vacation home immediately. They also informed me that I had been, quote, a terrible brother, and that the right thing to do, what family does, was to pay for their children's college tuition. I said some things I'm not proud of, but nothing I said was untrue. They eventually left. By the time my wife got home, our phones were already blowing up from new numbers I didn't recognize. She'd had to block several of them. I was exhausted in a way that I can only describe as beaten down. I'm generally a high-energy person. This was draining me. I drove up to the property the next day and padlocked the entrance gate. Heavy-duty chain, the best lock I could find. 400 yards uphill to the house. I figured that would be sufficient deterrent. Over the next few weeks, I took the property seriously. I reset all the door keypads, installed a full security camera system, including one that looks out over the valley, honestly worth every penny just for that view. Posted no trespassing and video monitoring signs on the property. Installed a heavy-duty lockout on the water shutoff. And I hired a property manager, a guy named David who lives in the area, manages a handful of properties, and it turns out used to be a city cop before being shot on duty. He relocated after that. His service dog goes everywhere with him. He's friends with all the local sheriff's deputies. As it turns out, that last detail would become extremely relevant. The brothers-in-law both called my office separately to pressure me about access. One of them had shown up with friends for a hunting weekend and been locked out at the gate, which I imagine was quite embarrassing. He went back and forth between threatening and playing the victim. At one point, he said he was going to rip that gate out of the goddamn ground. He also admitted they'd been renting the property to friends and called it their business. He told me I was ruining it and should refund their guests. I told them both clearly that neither of them would be using the property again, and I meant it. Months passed. We stayed no contact. Thanksgiving came up. In past years, there had been a family gathering at the vacation home, though my wife and I had only attended once in the last 7 years. My parents, to their enormous credit, refused to pressure me about it. Instead, they offered the family a choice: split the cost of an Airbnb in the mountains and do it there, or someone else hosts at their own home. The deadline to commit to the Airbnb passed without consensus, largely because my older sister couldn't contribute any money. Thanksgiving happened at my parents' house without us. And then came the Friday after Thanksgiving. My wife and I had spent the day with her parents. We'd deliberately left our phones in the car so we could actually be present and enjoy ourselves. We were in a genuinely good mood on the drive home. My wife picked up her phone first and started reading through the messages out loud. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I knew what had happened. Both brothers-in-law had gone to the vacation house that day. They used an angle grinder to cut through the chain on the gate, damaging it in the process. They tried the front door, ruined the lock set, and gouged the door badly trying to force it. They eventually got in through a utility floor door and a locked internal door. They also broke into the barn, I assume because it's deer season, and they were planning to use my 6-seat ATV for a group hunting trip. When they came back out through the front door, the sheriff's deputies were waiting for them. David had received camera notifications the moment they arrived. He watched what was happening on the feed, called the sheriff's department, and was there when they came out. The brothers-in-law apparently tried to talk their way out of it. The deputies weren't interested in their explanation. Breaking into an empty house in that area is treated very seriously. Typically, it's associated with drug users who strip and sell everything inside. They were arrested and charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats, because while being arrested, they made extensive promises about what they were going to do to me. Not smart. Not smart at all. I called the sheriff's department that evening and told them there was absolutely no misunderstanding. They had no right to be on my property. I wanted to press every charge. They were still in jail as of Saturday afternoon. My older sister had no money for bail. My middle sister would have had to cover both, given that her husband has a security clearance and the implications of a criminal record for his job apparently provided strong motivation to find solutions quickly. I called my parents Saturday, and the conversation was hard. My mother was crying. She'd been pressured by my sisters to ask me to tell the police it was all a misunderstanding. I refused. I told her I wouldn't do anything until I'd spoken with an attorney, and not until I'd been paid in full for every dollar of damage. I hadn't even been up to the property yet. The photos David sent were bad enough. I left messages with 2 attorney friends, asking them to point me toward the right legal help. I started thinking about suing for the money they'd collected from renting the place without my knowledge. I wasn't particularly interested in the money itself. I just wanted them to be as miserable as possible. The gloves were off. 5 days after the break-in, a courier-delivered envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a signed letter from both brothers-in-law and a cashier's check for $5,000. The letter was, and I genuinely did not expect this, a real apology. They acknowledged the break-in. They acknowledged it was wrong. The $5,000 was for repairs, with a promise to cover more if costs exceeded that amount. They said they would stay away from the property unless my wife and I specifically invited them. They asked me to do what I could to get the charges dropped, acknowledging that both of them could lose their jobs, and said they'd agree to a restraining order or whatever else I required. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't emotional when I read that. When I finally got home that evening, I cried from relief. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to just admit they were wrong. I met with an attorney. He recommended a settlement and mutual release agreement covering all four of them, sisters and husbands. Going the lawsuit route would almost certainly succeed, he said, but could take 2 or more years and might never produce actual payment. The $5,000 was mine to keep regardless. He'd draw up the agreement. My property manager had already estimated repairs at around $4,000, mostly for the front door, so we were covered. My attorney contacted the brothers-in-law, laid out the terms, and advised them to get their own lawyers. One of them told him directly that they could afford to either pay for damages or pay for a lawyer, not both, and that they figured a lawyer wouldn't help much, given that they had no legitimate defense. His priority was the criminal charges being dropped. They came in and signed. My attorney told me the atmosphere was tense. At one point, the middle brother-in-law apparently told both of my sisters to be quiet, or he was walking out, making his own separate deal, and leaving the rest of them to deal with the consequences on their own. They managed to get through it. They provided an additional cashier's check. The total was close enough to cover everything. We accepted it. I drove up to the property to see the damage in person and meet with the DA's office. Seeing it made me furious in a way the photographs hadn't. I walked around trying to calm down and failed. I called a close friend who stayed on the phone with me for over an hour while I vented. He eventually got me focused on something more useful, putting this behind me and moving on. I'm still not sure that's what I wanted, but I went and had lunch, felt better, and drove to the DA's office. The assistant DA handling the case agreed to drop all charges except trespassing, which would be reduced to a Class 2 misdemeanor. The brothers-in-law would plead guilty and pay whatever fine the judge set. I was also told that if they ever so much as caused a problem up there again, the full weight of the original charges would come back down on them. It helped, apparently, that they hadn't resisted arrest. If they had, none of this would have been possible. I stopped by the sheriff's department to thank the deputies personally. Couldn't track down David in time, but I'll make that right. My wife and I signed the agreement. The terms include a no-contact clause. If any of them show up somewhere we are, whoever arrived last has to leave. Contact only through attorneys or mutually agreed third parties. They keep whatever money they made from renting the house without my knowledge. I release them from all other liabilities up to this point. In exchange, it's over. Legally, financially, officially over. I haven't told my parents the specifics. They know we're trying to work things out. My sisters have almost certainly given them a version of events that serves their interests. That's fine. My parents are good people. They didn't deserve any of this. My dad changed the gate code. My mom is still spending time with the grandkids, separately at their homes, because she separates her relationships with the kids from her feelings about what the adults did. I think that's right. My wife has reached her limit with all of it. She's made clear that she's done being involved. She'll listen to me vent, but she's not stepping into it again. I don't blame her. She's been more patient than most people would be. As for me, looking back, I can trace the exact moment things started going wrong. It was when I bought my first place at 25. Neither sister owned a home yet. Something shifted in them after that. It got worse when I got married. Accusations of elitism, comments about my wife's family money, petty digs that became a permanent undercurrent to every family gathering. I genuinely didn't think they hated me. I thought we were just people with very different lives who didn't have much to say to each other. I was wrong about that. The property is still mine. My parents still use it. When the time comes, I'll probably sell it and take my wife somewhere nice for the weekend instead. The fantasy my older sister had of inheriting a piece of that land and building a compound of houses for her family, a plan I'd heard about and quietly ignored for years, is not going to happen. I've been asked if I regret not being harder on them from the start. Honestly, I avoided it because it would have stressed out my parents, and it stressed them out anyway, so I don't know. Maybe earlier action would have saved everyone a lot of grief. Or maybe this was always where it was headed. My small fantasy at this point is very simple. I never hear from them again.